Hello, today I'm going to show you how to use Unity's audio system to play music and sound effects. I'm going to take a very simple approach, and this is designed for beginners, so if you're more advanced, you'll want to look at more advanced tutorials. Okay, so first of all, music. Music is really simple to play in Unity, and I'll explain how first. So, the thing to remember in Unity is we have two different types of item for playing sounds, to put it vaguely. One of them is a component that goes onto an object in the scene, and that is an audio source. So an audio source plays audio. The other type of Unity thing for playing audio is the audio clip. And the reason I didn't say component there is because a clip is the file itself. That's the sound file. So in my project that I have open here as an example, I have an audio folder in my project window, and I have a variety of audio files there. Okay, a bunch of different ones. So if I want some kind of music to play in my scene, I need an audio source to be playing that music, and I need to then associate a file, an audio clip, with that source to make that particular clip play through that source. You can think of the audio source as your speakers or your record player if you want to be really old, and then the audio clips are the records that go on the record player in your scene. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new object in my scene. I'm right clicking on my hierarchy right now, and I'm choosing create empty. And I'm going to name this object music player. Okay, so I've got a music player here. Now I need to add an audio source to this object, so I'm going to click on the object itself, music player, and in the inspector, I'm going to choose add component, and I'm going to choose audio, and a bunch of options will show up, but what you really want is audio source. So I've got my music player here in my scene, and there's an audio source. And you can see that it shows up as a little speaker icon in your scene. And my music player has appeared off to the side for some reason. I'm going to put it back on to 000. That's not required unless you choose to set up directional audio, and we're not going to cover that in this tutorial. So by default, your audio source will have some settings on it. It will have one setting clicked by default, and that is play on awake. And what that setting does is it will play whatever audio clip is associated with this audio source as soon as the scene starts. Now, that's often not what you want for sound effects, but for music, it is what we want. So we're going to leave that ticked. We're going to tick one additional option, and that is the option right below it, which is loop. So we want our music to loop. That's usually what game music does. It just loops. So we're going to tick loop. And lastly, we need to actually put our record into our record player. And to do that, we need to click where it says audio clip. We need to either drag in or click on the circle and select the audio clip we want. So I'm going to drag in the one I want. It is the music clip from my project. I'm going to drag it up into the audio clip slot. So that will actually make my game play music when I run it. So let's go ahead and try it. Right, that seems to be working. So that was some open source music, by the way. You can often find open source music online. The music that I have in this tutorial are all Creative Commons 0 licensed music, which means they don't require attribution. They can just be used freely, which is great. Okay, so I've got my music player working. That is literally all you need to make music play in your game. Now, the only problem with this is that if you then go to a different scene, your music will stop. If anything causes this music player object to be unloaded, the music will stop. So there's some ways to get around that, but since this is a very simple tutorial, we'll just leave it at that. The only disadvantage now is if you go to a new scene and you want the same music to be playing, you'll just need to add another music player in that scene, and it means the music will restart when you enter the scene. But I think that's a fairly minor issue for a beginner. So you'll still have music in your scenes. You can still have different music in each scene, but this just means that your music will restart when you go to a new scene if it is the same track. But I think for a beginner, that's okay. All right, so for the next step, I'm going to show you how to create, sorry, my notifications are going off. I will show you how to create a sound effect. And we're going to put this sound effect on my character, and we're going to have it be a sound effect for when they're walking, just because that's what I already have set up on my character, and it makes it a bit easier. You can make sound effects for any situation. You just need to have a bit of a script to call the code for playing the sound effect in your given situation. So as long as you already have, you'll probably already have code for whatever situation it is, you'll just need to also add your sound effect code into that. So in my case, I'm going to want a looping sound effect playing when the player walks. So what I'm going to do is on my player might have multiple sound effects on them. So in the past, whenever we've wanted to access a component for a script, a component in a script, we've used the get component function, and it's been very easy, and that will get the components that are attached to the player. The problem is I might want to have multiple different sound effects attached to my player, so we'll still use that get component, but we're going to have to alter it a little bit. So here's what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and open up our player movement script. And this is my player movement script. I already have a bunch of code in here. Now you don't have to use a player movement script for your sound effect. You should put your sound effect code in whatever script is already handling the functionality for that situation. If you don't already have a script for that, then go ahead and make one. But I'm going to show you an example here where what I'm going to do is make my player play a footstep sound whenever they're walking. So what I'm going to do first of all is add a variable to hold the clip that I want to play, because we're going off the assumption that my player may want to play multiple different audio clips through their audio source, and we can't assume that the audio source will already have the right clip in it. So we're going to have to set that clip, what record to put in the record player, essentially, with code. So we need to put at the top of our script a place for us to set what clip is meant to be used for the footstep sound. So we'll create a variable that can be edited in the Unity editor to set that clip. And that's why we're going to use a public variable at the top of our script. So go to the top of your script, whether it be a new script or your existing player movement script or whatever it happens to be, and add a variable. So we'll say variable to hold the audio clip that should play when we walk. And we'll call that public to make sure it's editable in Unity. Audio clip, which is the type of variable, it's going to have an audio clip in it, and we'll call it footstep sound. Okay, footstep sound. So that is the audio clip we've just created. In Unity, if I save this and I go back to Unity, what I will see on my player, in my player movement script, is there's now a footstep sound and it says audio clip. And I can drag my footstep sound into that clip. So it's now set. So back in Visual Studio, we now need to use that. We've got a variable, it's got something in it that we've set in the editor. We now need to actually use that variable. So let's go down to in my code where I'm using my movement functions. And what I'm going to check, so first of all, I need to get a hold of the audio source that's attached to my player. Now, in reality, we haven't attached one yet. We'll go to that in a moment, but we need to get a hold of that audio source in order to change the clip on it and to play the clip. So this is inside my code for moving. So let's get it first. So get the audio source so we can play footstep sounds. And just as we did in the code right above where I am here, we're going to use this get component function to get our audio source. So audio source, our audio source equals get component audio source. So again, by now this should be starting to look a bit familiar if you've been following along with our tutorials so far, but the variable we're creating here is the audio source, and it's called our audio source, and we're assigning, what's the equal sign? We're putting into that variable, that container, the audio source that is attached to our game object. So get component will go to our game object. It will look for whatever type of component is in those brackets, or those angle brackets, and that is audio source. And it will then take it and put it into our variable. Okay, so once we have that audio source, we need to check check if our if our clip is already playing. So if we're already playing the footstep sound, then we shouldn't do anything. So if our audio source dot clip is equal to footstep sound, and if our audio source is playing, then we're gonna do nothing. Our audio source is already playing the sound effect we want. Else, now this is not a great way to structure your if-else statement, right? We don't really want to have an if with nothing in it and everything is actually done on the else. But it's a little bit more helpful for a beginner to see what's actually happening. So what we're checking here, just to make it very clear, is we're saying if our audio source's clip, the setting for the clip on that audio source. So in our record player analogy, we're checking what record is already on the record player. And if it is the same record sound effect that we're trying to play, our footstep sound, and it is currently playing, so these weird symbols here, that's an ampersand, and two of them together mean and in programming. So we're saying if the thing that is on our record player is already the thing we're trying to play, and it is actively playing, it's not just sat there, right? It's actively playing the sound, then we don't need to tell it to play the sound. We don't want to. We don't want to interrupt the sound that's already playing in order to play it again. But else, so if that's not true, it means we should play the sound. So first of all, we'll make sure that our record is on the record player. So our audio source dot clip equals footstep sound. Now notice, in this if statement up here, I have two equal signs, and that's very important. Two equal signs means we're checking if two things are equal. We're comparing them. So two equal signs means comparison. One equal sign means assignment. It means you're putting something into a variable slot. So one equal sign means you're putting something into a variable. Two equal sign means you're checking if two things are the same. Checking if they're equal. Okay, so that's very important. So right down here, we're actually putting our footstep sound into the audio clip. We're setting it to be equal. Then we need to actually play it. So we do our audio source dot play. And this is a function, so we need an open close parenthesis after the name of the function. So the functions, remember, do things, whereas variables are just data. So this is setting data. This is actually doing something. It's playing the sound effect. Sorry, squeaky chair. So that is all we need to do to make a sound effect play when we move upward. So if I save that and I go back to Unity and I press play up here, what we should see, if we press upward, we're going to hear our music first of all. It's a bit loud, I apologize. And then press up. We've got an error, and that's because we have missed a step here. We do not have, and it's really important to practice reading errors, because as a programmer, you're going to see many of them. All right, it's absolutely normal to get errors, and you should never be, afraid. Feel like you're a bad programmer for getting an error. It's absolutely normal, but it's important to practice reading them so you understand what they mean, and don't be afraid of them. So it says here, missing component exception, which sounds very fancy, but think about what it says there. Missing component. That means that there's a component that should be on our player that is missing, or we don't know if it's on the player, but that's where we've been editing, so we can probably assume it's on the player. So missing component exception. right? And then it says there is no audio source attached to the player game object, but a script is trying to access it. Well, that's exactly what we just did. We tried to access an audio source on our player. You probably need to add an audio source to the game object player, or your script needs to check if the component is attached before using it. So this is warning us that our script is trying to access an audio source and it's not there. And it actually tells us specifically it's on the player object. So we should know exactly what to do then. We just need to attach an audio source to our player, just like Unity has told us. So if you read these error messages, they seem a little scary, but they will tell you a lot of information. Now, if that wasn't enough information to help you fix the problem, you will also see in the console log, which is what this window is down here, when I have this line selected, there's actually even more information at the bottom. And it tells me the exact line number where the problem is. It's saying it's in my player movement script at line 44. And if I double click this, it will actually open Visual Studio to the line and have it highlighted, the line where the problem is. And you can see it's right here, our audio source. It's trying to use our audio source and it doesn't exist. And if you try to use something that doesn't exist in Unity, it will cause an error, or it will cause your script to not work, or it might even cause a crash. So it's very important that you do pay attention to these errors when they happen. Okay, so how do we fix it? Like I said, all we have to do is attach an audio source to our player. So if you click on your player and you go down and you do add component and type in audio source, you'll be able to add the audio source to the player. Now, we do not want this audio source to play on awake because this is a footstep sound. We don't want to randomly have a footstep sound whenever we first move. And we do not want it to loop because we're only going to play this. We're going to trigger it to play every time the person presses one of the buttons. So we don't need it to loop. We'll be doing that ourselves. That's what our code that we wrote just did. So let's try this again, and we'll see if we can get our footstep sounds to happen when we press up. It's a little bit hard to hear with the music, but it is working. Let's turn off the music in order to check. So if we click on our music player and we just go to our inspector and we disable it by clicking this tick box in the top left of the inspector window, that will disable our music object. So if we press play here, we can now hopefully hear our player's footsteps a bit better. And that's working. So we just now need to add this code to all of the other movement directions. So I'm going to go ahead and copy paste because we don't have to change anything about this code in order for it to work. Okay, so I've copied that into each of my movement directions in my script. This is how my script is set up. Your script may be set up entirely different. So if you are trying to add a footstep sound to your character, you may need to do it in a different way, right? The only part that this is really going to be the same is that you're going to have to call audio source.play and you're going to have to set that audio clip. The rest of the code may end up being a bit different for your game. This part really should be essentially the same. It just has to be put in the right place for your game to play the sound effect that you want. Okay, so back in Unity, if I press play now, I should be able to move in any of the directions and get a sound effect. Now this isn't the best sound effect in the world. It's not really going fast enough to represent how my character is actually walking. But for this tutorial, it's enough to show you how it works. So there are a lot more advanced things you can do, and there are also some problems with the approaches that we've shown you here. This approach, for example, if your player object is destroyed and you wanted to play a sound effect when the player got destroyed, you wouldn't be able to do that because the audio source is on the player. So if you think about this, like your audio source is a record player and everything the record player is attached to is destroyed, the record player is also going to get destroyed, and it's not going to play any music if it's destroyed. So just like a record player, if our audio source is destroyed, it can't play anything. The way to get around that, there are some various options you could use. There is an option to play an audio one-shot, which will create a separate object that plays the audio and then destroys itself after the audio is done. That can be a really good option for death sound effects. There is other options such as for your music, for example, there's a function called Don't Destroy on Load that will prevent the music from stopping when you go between scenes. Be very careful with that one, because what will happen there is that your music, if you go back to the first scene, will double, which you don't want. So music can be a bit tricky because of that, which is why we only showed you the simple version in this tutorial. Okay, so I think that's enough to get you started with some sound effects. Use what you've learned here. You can take a dip into the more advanced stuff with your own research, but what you have here should get you started. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below, and I hope that this video was of use to you. Thank you. Bye.